Now available in paperback, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Pick up your copy of John Haynes at Death's Door at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. On Monday, the board of directors at Disney decided to remove Bob Chapek from his position as Chief Executive Officer, or CEO, and decided to replace him with the former Disney CEO, Bob Iger. Now, your Disney board of directors wanted to remove Bob Chapek from his Chief Executive Officer position because they felt that the company wasn't going in the right direction under his leadership. Now, your Bob Chapek had taken over as the Disney CEO in 2020 when Bob Iger stepped down from the position and was looking to retire after years of service as Disney's CEO. And your Bob Iger was also looking to leave Disney, which was in a really starting at the state of a serious decline, and they wanted to go out here and get somebody who would turn the company around and reverse its fortunes from faltering box offices from intellectual properties like Star Wars and your Marvel Studios and many other companies that Disney had purchased over the last couple of years, such as 20th Century Fox. Now, the goal with your Bob Chapek was to get Disney back on track and make it competitive like it was under CEO Michael Eisner, who came into Disney in the mid-'80s and by the late 1980s had gotten Disney competitive with hits like The Little Mermaid and movies like Oliver and Company, and then ushered in a new golden age with movies like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, and led to Disney becoming a juggernaut in media, buying up platforms like ABC Television Network, ESPN, and many other cable channels. Now, when your Michael Eisner was in charge, Disney was a dominant force. However, after Michael Eisner retired and Bob Iger took over, Disney was still going strong, but eventually started to lose momentum in the late 2010s after it bought Marvel and Lucasfilm. And it seems like after your Disney bought Marvel and Lucasfilm, yes, they did make profits in the short term on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the first movie in the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. However, as the decade came to an end, Disney started to go into decline because instead of going out here and creating new properties, what your Bob Iger did was coast on old intellectual properties, believing that Disney would remain strong if they continue to coast on old IPs, not understanding that what Michael Eisner did was create new IPs by going out here and creating a business approach where he would go out here and fund movies that had really small budgets and then would reap big profits by making these movies with extremely small budgets that were maybe $3 or $5 million, and then he would be able to flip those movies and have those movies make $25 to even $100 or $200 million. That is how your Michael Eisner basically turned Disney around, making movies on smaller budgets, but your Bob Iger, not understanding the business approaches of a Michael Eisner, went out here and was pouring more money into all of these older IPs, and he was also going out here remaking old films. What's even worse than that was as he was going out here investing in old IPs and remaking old films, was he was pushing social justice and identity politics in many of his new films, and these sequels upon sequels were starting to turn audiences off, and it got even worse as he was putting these social justice themes in many of the movies at Disney. I mean, I remember sitting there watching Incredibles 2 and watching all of the feminism in that movie, and it basically turned me off from that film. And that was a film that many people anticipated watching, but it was a big time disappointment. Now, your Iger also went out here and allowed Kathleen Kennedy to push feminism in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and this also further alienated fans of that franchise who had been anticipating a sequel trilogy since the 1980s. However, this whole sequel trilogy underperformed at the box office and basically tarnished the entire Star Wars brand. And as the Marvel Cinematic Universe came to an end of its Phase 3 and started its Phase 4, Marvel Studios started to go into decline creatively, really with Captain America Civil War, where instead of staying true to the source material of the comics, they started to again push into the area of identity politics and social justice. And by Avengers Endgame, people were starting to get fed up with the identity politics, but your Bob Iger allowed people at Marvel Studios to continue pushing the identity politics. And instead of talented writers and screenwriters like myself working at Disney, many of those talented, qualified people were replaced with a lot of social justice activists. And these activists want to go out here and push identity politics in many of the projects instead of looking to go out here and entertain viewers with a compelling story. Now, this whole trend that Bob Iger ushered in basically led to the start of the decline of Disney. And while back in 2019 and 2020, people weren't seeing the numbers coming up, the numbers were eventually starting to come up as Bob Chapek took over. And your Bob Chapek basically was trying to turn things around, hoping to go out here and fire many of the social justice warriors, fire many of the activists, and try to curb and minimize and mitigate most of their damage. However, the board was really upset about Bob Chapek as related to two issues. One was the so-called Don't Say Gay bill that was a major controversy in Florida, and the other was the just declining box office as related to many of their intellectual properties. Now, as I see it, none of this was Bob Chapek's fault, and your Bob Chapek really didn't have enough time to turn things around. I mean, when I compare Bob Chapek to Michael Eisner, Eisner, back when Disney was dying in the 70s and early 80s and had flops like The Black Cauldron, was given enough time to turn things around because he came on, I think, in about 1984 or 85, and he eventually started working towards turning things around by making films like Brave Little Toaster and giving Pixar its start with movies, with little experimental movies like Tin Toy. And he also went out here and made movies like Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company, which basically started the turnaround for Disney before they had their first smash hit with Little Mermaid. So he had been working behind the scenes towards turning things around. Moreover, he had been working with smaller subsidiaries of Disney like Touchstone Pictures and working on all of those smaller movies that I mentioned. Movies like Pretty Woman, which didn't cost them that much but made Julia Roberts a star and made over $100 million. Many of these smaller franchises like Three Ninjas, many of these smaller films that had people in them like Charles Grodin. I remember a couple of those movies that were small in budget but made big profits. But your Bob Iger really wasn't focused on that type of vision. And again, your Bob Chapek was never given a chance to actually implement his vision because he was too busy cleaning up Bob Iger's mess, and he hadn't even started to turn the Disney ship around. And now the Disney ship is definitely going to wind up sinking back under Bob Iger because the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And the big problem at Disney right now, as I see it, is the fact that they have too many projects that are not about entertaining the audience, but about going out here and pushing social justice and identity politics. Because most people, they go to the movies for an escape from their problems. And the big problem with most Disney movies today is that they go out here and give you a problem, and that's the last thing a person in the audience wants is another problem. I mean, most people, if they want to hear about problems, they'll go out here and watch the 6 o'clock news for free, and they don't want to spend $15 at the movies to go see some far-left social justice activists going out here and telling them how to live, because they don't need a far-left activist telling them how to live and then telling them that they have to give them money for hearing them go out here and lecture them. That's what many of the people currently at Disney don't understand about the messages that they're putting in their movies, and they don't understand that the messages that they're putting in their movies are alienating most of their customers. Moreover, many of those customers who used to go to their theme parks are alienated because the prices are so high, and this is what's leading to a major decline in profits at Disney, which never had a visionary like in years like a Michael Eisner to be able to let people understand that, you know, we're here to entertain you, we're here to give you a good time. They don't have that type of person there. No, what we have is people in charge who, like your Bob Iger, who want to go out here and push social justice and identity politics and want to preach at the customer, when the goal of Walt Disney's Walt Disney World and Disney was originally meant to entertain customers and give them an escape from their problems. It was to give them a fantasy to get away from their stresses and troubles in life, and it was a way for them to go out here and get entertained by these popular characters. Now, a problem I see at Disney is that they're sitting there, again, going in a vicious circle, and one of the big problems is they think because they have so many IPs, they can just coast on those IPs. And this was one of the disadvantages of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that was pushed through by the red and blue parties and signed by Bill Clinton. It allowed companies like Disney to buy multiple television stations, multiple radio stations, and multiple entertainment, newspapers, and publishing companies. And now all of those companies are consolidated under the Disney banner. Unfortunately, as they're consolidated under the Disney banner, many of these IPs are actually depreciating in value, and that's something that your Bob Chapek, your Bob Iger have not really thought about long term, but it's something that I understand as related to creating intellectual properties, that intellectual properties do get old, and most audiences, they're going to look at those characters as their fathers and grandfathers' characters, like many Gen Xers would look at your Zorro, your Tarzan, and your Lone Ranger. They weren't looking at those characters because we had our own characters in G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Voltron, and then you had your Gen Y who had their own characters in your Power Rangers, in Batman the Animated Series, in many other properties out here, like Eek the Cat and many others that were on Fox Kids and like Carmen Sandiego. Those kids had their own characters, and even in the 21st century with the millennials, they had their own characters on shows like Teen Titans, and and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. They had their own characters, and instead of going out here and looking to create new IPs, what your Disney is resting on the laurels of old IPs, not understanding that they depreciate in value because the audience starts to get older. And yes, there's some nostalgia from those older people as related to those characters, but those young kids don't know who those characters are, and they don't care. And that's where Disney has a major Achilles heel, because they have a catalog filled with characters that are now on their way to becoming 40, 50, even 60 years old. Like Star Wars is currently 40 years old. I mean, the last movie, Return of the Jedi, is 40 years old. And even the prequel trilogy, those movies are 20 plus years old. Properties like Alien and Predator are headed towards almost being 50 years old. And many at Disney think that these properties still have the same high value, not understanding that the audience that grew up with these properties is aging out and dying out. So the people who used to know these characters, that audience is shrinking at this point. But Disney wants to go out here and take all of these old IPs and still think that they can be blockbusters at the box office. But it's hard to have a blockbuster at the box office with an old character that audiences don't really know. And that is something that your Bob Iger did not understand, that led to the complete collapse of Star Wars as an intellectual property. It led to the collapse of Marvel Studios as an intellectual property right now, because instead of going out here and taking comic stories straight out of the comics for Phase 4, they turned it into Fail 4 because they wanted to go their own way and deviate from the source material. And now Marvel Studios is in a major decline, like many other Disney properties. And yes, they've got the big catalog, but sadly, they don't have somebody there with a vision to create new properties. And that's where your Michael Eisner was a genius, because he understood, yes, we can still make Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, but we've got to create new product. We've got to create a new series of characters. That's why he started with Brave Little Toaster, Oliver and Company, and then got his hit with Ariel. Then he got the princesses, and further went on. He was looking to make new material because he understood that old material is not going to connect with younger fans. He's got to create new characters and new stories in order to appeal to those customers. And that's something Disney isn't doing, because woke Disney is all about social justice. Woke Disney is all about identity politics. Woke Disney is about yelling at the customer, and it's not about entertaining the customer. So your Disney just went from struggling at bad and to worse, because again, it's insane to think going back to the same man who created many of the policies that led to the decline of Disney is going to be able to turn Disney around. That's just not possible if this was the man who went out here and implemented most of these policies at Disney, like going out here and giving Kathleen Kennedy a 5-year contract, even though she had not proven she could open a movie successfully and maintain a franchise. That was just insane to go out here and give her that kind of thing, and then contract, and then go out here and give Kevin Feige no sort of supervision by removing Ike Perlmutter. So this basically this is why both of these studios are struggling right now. And Disney is overall struggling because they bought the catalog from Fox. They went out here, took out a bunch of loans, not understanding that many of the properties in that catalog were depreciated in value. So they bought Fox for billions of dollars under his leadership, not understanding that, yeah, you own the Fox intellectual properties, but those properties are depreciating in value, and the audience that used to know those properties is getting older. So you would have profited more if you had gone to a creator like myself or one of these other independent creators and cut a deal with one of those creators for a new intellectual property and created a new franchise rather than buying old depreciated property, because these IPs, again, they were wealth-building assets at one time, but the whole thing is that as audiences grow older, what happens is, yes, there's a nostalgia for them, but they are not something that is an asset that can appeal to new customers, because new customers want their own stories and new customers want their own IPs. Now, your Bob Chapek was trying to turn your Disney around the same way David Zaslav is trying to turn Warner Brothers around, and sadly he was cut off at the knees by the board of directors, which did not have the patience to allow your Bob Chapek to go out here and try to rebuild Disney, and the work that would be needed to rebuild Disney. He was starting to do that work, and it was going to take several years for him to go out here and do that work. but sadly, he's not able to do that work, and Disney's back with Bob Iger, and sadly, this is where I see your Disney going from the bad place it was in the mid-1970s to the point where it was nearly about to go out of business in the early 80s. A lot of people don't know the history of Disney in the 70s and how bad things were and how Disney was basically this close to going out of business. Yes, it was making movies like Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and Pete's Dragon that did okay at the box office, but Disney was struggling overall because they weren't really creating new intellectual properties, and by the time it hit Black Cauldron in 82 or 83, they were this close to going out of business until Michael Eisner came around and started focusing on rebuilding by creating new stuff with smaller budgets and going out here and looking to create new stars. That was one of the things he tried to do because he understood that aging actors and aging IPs, you couldn't hold on to them. You needed to go out here and create new material. And that's where Disney has a problem, because Bob Iger doesn't have a vision. Bob Iger didn't have a direction. He basically he was just going out here buying companies like Marvel and Lucasfilm in order to get new properties. But the sad part is he did not hire any talent to go out here and create new stories or go out here and create new characters. And instead of him hiring talented writers and artists like myself, he went out here and hired a bunch of social justice activists. And those activists, yes, they can go out here and yell at people about politics in these new properties, but they can't tell a story. They can't create compelling characters. They can't create any sort of story that resonates with audiences, and they can't make anybody care. And that's why the Disney brand, as I see it, may possibly wind up going bankrupt in 2025 or so, because as I see it right now, your Disney right now is a bloated company that is carrying the weight of too many expensive AIPs, and you have your Disney just having too many employees working for it that aren't even qualified to work for it, like I believe your Jessica Gao is, who was running the She-Hulk show and did no research on the character or gone out here and even did research on what lawyers do in court. These are the kind of people who are working at Disney right now. They're hired because they are a ethnicity. They are hired because they are a race, but they're not hired because they're seasoned professionals with publishing credits or a skill set that shows that they know a craft as related to storytelling or filmmaking. And that is the big problem over at Disney. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I believe Disney will be bankrupt, because eventually, like MGM in the 60s, you reach a point where you cannot continue to keep financing superhero movies, as if they're costing $300 million or more a picture. Eventually, you reach a point where this just isn't sustainable anymore. I mean, you can only make so many movies and then have them with a diminishing returns, like the Phase 4, where we saw the box office drop 50%. There's eventually going to be a breaking point where the studio realizes we can't keep financing these kinds of films, like your Marvel Phase 4, which I call Fail 4, and a Fail 5, which is looking like right now with all of the identity politics. It just isn't a feat of economically sustainable to keep making these kinds of movies, because these movies are like the ones in the 60s, the musicals, the war movies, the epic movies, basically going to cost more than the studio can afford. And eventually, you're going to have to realize that this whole model is just not working anymore. But sadly, that type of revelation isn't going to come, because your Bob Iger is still trying to coast on the previous success of Disney, not understanding that that era is over. Right now, your Disney needs somebody like a Michael Eisner who understands how to create and build new intellectual properties, somebody who knows how to find rookie directors who can work with a small budget, somebody who can find actresses and actors who will work on small budget, and go find those people to go out here and create the new movies that will become classics, like Pretty Woman, like The Three Ninjas, like many of the smaller Disney films that turn out to be blockbusters. They need somebody who can go out here and work on smaller budgets and go out here and create characters with smaller budgets and go out here and create material that can be made for under maybe $20-30 million and can go out here and be a blockbuster that opens strong. That's the kind of guy that or girl that they need. Somebody who can work on small budget, somebody who can go out here and make small budget properties and make new characters fresh for a new generation of fans. And sadly, they don't have that visionary. All they want to do is go back to who failed before. And again, going back to who failed before is the kind of codependent thinking that women have when they have a bad boyfriend and a bad breakup with one boyfriend. Because they're scared of moving their lives forward, they go back to the guy who abused them instead of understanding the way forward is going into a new direction. But instead of going in that new direction, they stay in the same direction, not understanding doing what failed before is insanity. And sadly, when you have an insane mindset or a codependent mindset, which has been established at Disney, the only way you're going to go is round and around, down a drain until you hit the bottom of the drain. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my action-packed fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, novels like The Thetas and Eternal Night, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find those books on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, E-Steam The Sands of Time. It's action and adventure in ancient Egypt in this terrific teen time travel romance. Get your copy of E-Steam The Sands of Time at your favorite online bookseller today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online booksellers everywhere today.